When you leave without drama, without begging, without trying to convince her to see your value, something powerful begins to happen beneath the surface. At first, she experiences what she thinks is relief. The tension is gone. The expectations are gone. The expectations are gone. The responsibility of showing up emotionally disappears. In her mind, she tells herself that she's finally free, that she made the right choice, that life is about to feel lighter. This phase is critical because most men misunderstand it. They see her smiling, posting, going out, laughing, and they panic. They assume she's happier without them. But what she's actually experiencing is not fulfillment, it's distraction. Relief is not happiness. Relief is simply the absence of pressure, and pressure always returns when reality replaces fantasy. Fantasy thrives on distance. It thrives when there are no consequences, no routines, no accountability. In fantasy, she can imagine a future where everything is exciting, effortless, and emotionally perfect. But when you remove yourself completely, your presence, your validation, your masculine certainty, you remove the fuel that kept that fantasy alive. Your absence doesn't immediately hurt her, it confuses her. She expected you to chase. She expected you to explain. She expected you to explain. She expected emotional resistance she could lean against. When none of that happens, her subconscious registers something unfamiliar: finality. Silence is loud, not because it demands attention, but because it forces reflection. Without you checking in, without you trying to prove your worth, without you reacting emotionally, her mind begins filling the space you once occupied. And here's where the shift starts. The version of life she imagined without you doesn't match the emotional experience she's actually living. The excitement fades faster than she thought it would. The attention from others feels shallow. Conversations feel repetitive. The novelty wears off. And slowly, quietly, the comparison begins. She starts remembering how she felt around you when things were good. Not the arguments, not the tension at the end. She remembers the safety, the laughter, the grounded energy you brought into her life. The way problems felt smaller when you were present. The way she didn't have to question your intentions. These memories don't come because you reminded her. They come because your absence gave them space to surface. If you had stayed, chased, or hovered, she would have stayed focused on your flaws. Absence removes friction, and without friction, perspective returns. Reality is unforgiving. It doesn't care about narratives or emotional justifications. Reality simply shows her what remains when you're gone, and what remains often feels emptier than she anticipated. This is where regret quietly takes root, not as pain yet, but as doubt. She starts questioning her certainty. Why doesn't this feel as good as I expected? Why do I still think about him? Why does no one else make me feel that same calm attraction? These questions don't scare her at first, but they unsettle her. And unsettled emotions don't go away on their own. What intensifies this process is your consistency in absence. You don't disappear dramatically. You don't unfollow impulsively. You don't post cryptic messages or try to provoke jealousy. You simply move forward. That calm, grounded withdrawal signals strength. It tells her subconsciously that you didn't leave because you were weak or rejected. You left because you respect yourself. And self respect is magnetic, especially in hindsight. As time passes, the emotional contrast sharpens. The men she interacts with now react too fast, try too hard, or lack direction. They provide attention but not presence, excitement but not stability, attraction without depth. She begins realizing that what she lost wasn't just a relationship, it was a masculine frame that anchored her emotionally. This realization doesn't come as a dramatic breakdown, it comes in quiet moments, late nights, small disappointments, moments when she expects to feel fulfilled and doesn't. This is the stage where fantasy officially collapses. Fantasy promises endless excitement. Reality delivers repetition. Fantasy says freedom equals happiness. Reality shows that freedom without connection feels empty. And because you are no longer there to absorb her emotions, she has nowhere to place this discomfort but inward. That's when regret stops being theoretical and starts becoming emotional. Importantly, this regret is not triggered by guilt. It's triggered by contrast. She doesn't miss you because you were perfect. She misses how she felt when your masculine energy balanced her emotions. She misses the way you showed up consistently without needing validation. She misses the version of herself she was when she was with you. More relaxed, more secure, more feminine. And the painful truth she begins to face is that she didn't lose that version of herself because of circumstances. She lost it because she walked away from you. Right before she considers reaching out, there's a moment of internal resistance. Pride tells her not to. Ego tells her she should be over you by now. But emotion doesn't follow logic. Emotion follows memory and absence. And because you didn't try to control the outcome, because you allowed space instead of forcing resolution, the emotional door remains open on her side. She feels the pull not because you demanded it, but because reality proved her wrong. This is why chasing never works. Chasing keeps the fantasy alive. It allows her to believe she made the right decision because you're still there, still available, still predictable. Walking away removes that safety net. It forces her to confront the emotional consequences of losing a man who knew his worth. And when reality finally replaces fantasy, the weight of that loss becomes undeniable. By the time regret fully forms, it's no longer about you trying to come back. It's about her realizing what she gave up. And that realization only happens when you let silence do the talking, absence do the teaching, and reality do the correcting. When you stop emotionally engaging, something fundamental shifts in the dynamic, and most people underestimate how deep this shift goes. Emotional withdrawal isn't coldness, punishment, or manipulation. It's the natural consequence of self respect. You are no longer trying to manage your feelings, fix the connection, or prove your value. You are simply no longer available in the way you once were. And that absence of emotional access creates a psychological vacuum that her mind cannot ignore. In the early stages, she may not consciously register fear. What she feels first is confusion. The emotional script she expected doesn't play out. She expected reactions, questions, explanations, emotional intensity. She expected you to fight, to resist the separation, to show her how important she is to you. Instead, she encounters calm, distance, silence, and calm is unsettling when someone is prepared for chaos. It sends a signal that something has changed, not just externally, but internally within you. This is where the power dynamic begins to reverse. When you were emotionally available, when you were trying to hold the connection together, you were signaling investment without uncertainty. That made you emotionally predictable. Emotional predictability creates comfort, but it also removes tension. When you withdraw, uncertainty replaces comfort. And uncertainty is the gateway to fear, not fear of danger, but fear of loss. Her subconscious begins asking questions before her conscious mind catches up. Why isn't he reacting the way I expected? Why isn't he trying to get me back? Why does it feel like he's actually okay without me? These questions create a subtle anxiety, not panic, not desperation, just enough discomfort to make her pay attention. And attention is where attraction begins to reawaken. Fear of loss doesn't activate when someone leaves loudly. It activates when someone leaves quietly and doesn't look back. Loud exits can be rationalized. That can be dismissed as emotional weakness. Quiet exits suggest strength, boundaries, and self control, and those qualities force her to reassess the story she told herself about why things ended. As your emotional energy withdraws, she begins to feel the absence in unexpected places. Moments where she would normally text you and stops herself. Situations where she expects your presence and realizes it's gone. Emotional habits don't disappear overnight, they linger. And when they have nowhere to go, they turn inward. That inward turn is uncomfortable because it brings up questions she hasn't fully answered yet. At this stage, the fear isn't about losing you as a person. It's about losing access to you emotionally. She senses that the version of you who is always available, always steady, always responsive, may no longer exist. And that realization threatens her sense of control. Control doesn't mean manipulation, it means emotional certainty. When that certainty disappears, insecurity takes its place. Your emotional withdrawal also removes her ability to define the narrative. When you're explaining yourself, defending your actions, or seeking closure, you're participating in her emotional frame. You're helping her process the breakup in a way that favors emotional resolution. But when you stop engaging, she has to process it alone. And alone, unresolved emotions don't settle, they grow. The absence of emotional feedback creates a mirror. She starts reflecting on her own behavior, not because you accused her, but because there's no longer a distraction. She begins wondering whether she misjudged you, whether she underestimated your strength, whether she assumed you would always be there no matter what. That assumption collapsing is what triggers fear. because assumptions feel safe until they're proven wrong. What intensifies this fear is your consistency. If you waver, reach out emotionally one day, disappear the next, you create confusion without respect. But when your withdrawal is steady, calm, and grounded, it communicates finality without hostility. That's what makes it powerful. She doesn't feel pushed away, she feels left behind. As time goes on, her emotional system starts recalibrating. She notices that you're no longer part of her emotional regulation. She can't rely on your reassurance, your presence, or your reactions. This loss creates emotional friction, and emotional friction forces awareness. She begins to realize that she wasn't just choosing to leave a relationship, she was choosing to lose an emotional anchor. This is where fear deepens. Not fear that you'll never come back, but fear that if you did, it wouldn't be the same. She senses that you've changed, that your emotional center is no longer tied to her approval. That shift makes her feel smaller in the dynamic, and when someone feels smaller, they instinctively seek to regain balance. Her mind begins replaying moments where she had emotional leverage and didn't value it, moments where she assumed your patience was infinite, moments where she tested boundaries and expected you to absorb the emotional impact. Now, without that buffer, she feels exposed. Vulnerability replaces certainty. Fear of loss also sharpens attraction because it introduces contrast. Before, she knew where she stood. Now she doesn't. Before, she felt chosen. Now she feels uncertain. And uncertainty awakens desire not because it feels good, but because it demands resolution. The human mind hates open loops. Emotional withdrawal creates one. At this point, she may start checking your social presence, asking mutual connections about you, or imagining conversations that haven't happened. These aren't conscious strategies, they're emotional attempts to regain clarity. She wants to know whether she still matters to you, whether she still has access, whether the door is truly closed or just quiet. What she doesn't realize yet is that the fear she's experiencing is the same fear you once felt when you were emotionally invested. The difference is that now you're not acting from it. And that composure amplifies her emotional response because fear loses its power when it's not mirrored. The more you maintain emotional self control, the more her internal narrative shifts. She can no longer see herself as the one who walked away from something disposable. She starts seeing herself as someone who may have lost something irreplaceable. That reframing is crucial. Loss feels heavier when it's paired with permanence. Eventually, the fear evolves into curiosity. Curiosity about your emotional state, curiosity about your growth, curiosity about your growth, curiosity about your growth. Curiosity about whether she still has a place in your life. This curiosity isn't about reconciliation yet. It's about reassurance. She wants to know if the emotional door is truly closed, because if it is, she has to fully grieve the loss. And grief is something people avoid until they have no other choice. This is the psychological moment right before she reaches out. Not when she misses you intensely, but when the fear of not knowing outweighs the fear of rejection. She may justify contact casually, innocently, even practically. But underneath that reach is an emotional question. Do I still matter to you? And here's the paradox. The reason this fear becomes so strong is because you didn't try to create it. You didn't threaten, guilt, or withdraw emotionally to provoke a reaction. You simply chose yourself. You chose emotional stability over emotional chasing, and that choice forced her emotional system to recalibrate without you. By the time she considers coming back, the fear has already done its work. It has shifted the power dynamic from certainty to uncertainty, from comfort to curiosity, from assumption to awareness. And whether she acts on that fear or not, the truth remains the same. Emotional withdrawal didn't push her away. It revealed the value she only fully recognized once it was no longer accessible. That is the quiet power of emotional self control. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. When she begins exploring new options after you're gone, it often looks convincing from the outside. New conversations, new attention, new energy. To her friends, to social media, even to herself at first. It appears like momentum, like proof that she made the right decision. But what she doesn't immediately recognize is that options are not replacements, they are comparisons. And every comparison quietly pulls you back into the frame, even when you're not there. At first, these new options feel flattering. Validation is easy to get, especially in the early stages. Compliments come quickly. Interest feels exciting. There's novelty in being seen through fresh eyes. But novelty has a short lifespan. It's intense, but it's shallow. It doesn't test character, consistency, or emotional depth. And because she hasn't yet processed the loss of you, these interactions function more like distractions than connections. This is where the real realization begins to form. The men she encounters now react differently than you did. They overinvest too fast or stay emotionally vague. They try to impress instead of lead. They chase approval instead of setting direction. At first, she may not consciously label this difference, but she feels it. Something is missing. Not excitement, but grounding. Not attention, but presence. You weren't just someone who liked her. You were someone who held a masculine frame. You showed up consistently. You didn't collapse emotionally when things got tense. You didn't shape your identity around her moods. That frame created polarity. It allowed her to relax into her feminine energy because she trusted the structure you provided. Without it, interactions feel unstable, even when they're entertaining. As she continues engaging with new options, the contrast sharpens. Conversations feel repetitive. Emotional intensity feels forced. Promises feel hollow. There's interest, but no weight behind it. She starts noticing that attraction without emotional leadership feels empty. It's stimulating, but not satisfying, and satisfaction is what lingers when novelty fades. This is when comparison becomes unavoidable. She remembers how you handled stress, how you stayed calm when things were uncertain, how you didn't seek validation but offered reassurance through action. These memories aren't romanticized fantasies, they're emotional benchmarks, and every new option is measured against them, whether she admits it or not. Importantly, this realization doesn't happen because you tried to prove your value. It happens because you're not there to compete. When a man competes for attention, he lowers his perceived value. When a man removes himself and continues building his life, his value becomes clearer in hindsight. Absence turns your qualities into reference points. What frustrates her during this phase is that she can't recreate the emotional dynamic she had with you by simply replacing the person. She may find men who are attractive, successful, or charming, but something feels off. They don't challenge her emotionally in the same way. They don't hold space without trying to control outcomes. They don't bring the same sense of calm authority. This is where regret begins transitioning from quiet doubt to emotional clarity. She starts realizing that what she lost wasn't accidental. It wasn't circumstantial, it was specific. You brought something rare into her life: emotional leadership, combined with restraint, strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance. And those traits are not common even among men who appear high value on the surface. As this awareness grows, her attraction shifts from external stimulation to internal reflection. She wonders whether she misjudged you, whether she underestimated what you offered, whether she took stability for granted because it felt familiar. Familiarity can disguise value when it's consistently present. Only when it's gone does its absence become noticeable. The men she interacts with now often reveal their insecurities quickly. They seek reassurance. They test boundaries. They over-explain. These behaviors don't repel her immediately, but they don't anchor her either. They create emotional noise without emotional depth, and noise becomes exhausting over time. She may also notice that these men respond emotionally to her moods in ways you didn't. They react instead of lead. They follow instead of set direction. That difference matters more than she initially realized, because emotional leadership isn't about control, it's about stability. And stability is what allows attraction to mature rather than burn out. This is the stage where she begins to emotionally revisit the relationship with you, not to relive it, but to reevaluate it. She sees moments differently now. Situations she once interpreted as distance, she now recognizes as strength. Boundaries she once resisted, she now understands as self-respect. Your calmness, once mistaken for emotional detachment, reveals itself as emotional maturity. Crucially, this realization is not accompanied by urgency yet. It's accompanied by respect. Respect grows slowly, but it lasts longer than desire. And respect is what makes regret meaningful. Without respect, regret is temporary. With it, regret becomes motivating. She may start wondering how you're doing, not out of nostalgia, but out of curiosity. Has he moved on? Has he grown? Is he happier without me? These questions signal a shift in perception. She's no longer seeing herself as the prize who walked away. She's beginning to see you as the man who didn't need to stay. That shift is uncomfortable. It challenges her sense of control over the past. Because if you're thriving without her, then her decision didn't diminish you. It revealed your independence. And independence is deeply attractive in hindsight. As the contrast continues, the emotional gap widens. New options feel temporary. You feel permanent. Even though you're absent, your presence lingers as a standard. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied something consistent and rare. Eventually, she recognizes that the connection she lost with you wasn't easily replaceable. It required alignment, timing, and emotional maturity on both sides. And while she may meet many people, she may not meet many who offer what you did without asking for something in return. This realization doesn't immediately lead to action, but it plants a seed of doubt about her choice, a seed of respect for your restraint, a seed of respect for your restraint, but of attraction rooted not in excitement, but in depth. Right before she considers reaching out, there's often a moment of clarity. She understands that the men she's meeting now are not wrong. They're just not you. And what she lost wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was grounded. It was rare. That's when regret becomes personal. Not because she's lonely, not because she failed to replace you, but because she finally understands what you represented in her life and why that absence feels heavier than she expected. And all of this happens without you saying a word, without you defending yourself, without you proving anything. Because true masculine value doesn't announce itself, it reveals itself through contrast. There comes a point where everything shifts, not because you did something dramatic, but because you didn't. You didn't chase, you didn't linger emotionally, you didn't try to re enter her life through explanations or nostalgia, you simply kept moving. And while that choice feels quiet on the surface, it creates the most powerful signal of all: growth without attachment. This is the moment where emotions stop looking backward and start colliding with the present version of you she no longer has access to. At first, she assumes your silence means you're struggling. Most people do. It's comforting to believe that someone who walked away is hurting more than you are. It protects the ego. But time disrupts that assumption. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the absence of emotional turbulence from your side starts to speak louder than words ever could. You're not trying to get her attention. You're not trying to show her what she lost. You're simply building a life that doesn't revolve around her validation. This is where the real magnetism begins. Growth is undeniable when it's authentic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It shows up in energy, consistency, and direction. Whether she hears about you through mutual connections, notices changes in your presence, or simply senses the emotional distance, one thing becomes clear: you didn't collapse after losing her. You expanded. That expansion forces a painful contrast. While she may still be processing emotions, testing options, or oscillating between certainty and doubt, you appear grounded, stable, unbothered. Not because you never cared, but because you learned how to care without losing yourself. And that difference matters more than attraction. It earns respect. Respect is the foundation of regret. Without it, regret is fleeting. With it, regret becomes personal. She begins to see that you didn't grow to punish her. You grew because that's who you are. You chose discipline over drama, purpose over pursuit. And that choice reframes the entire story she told herself about the breakup. What unsettles her most isn't that you're doing better. It's that you're doing better without trying to show it. There's no performative success, no indirect messages, no attempts to be seen. And that quiet confidence triggers something deep because it suggests that your value was never dependent on her recognition. It existed independently all along. As this realization settles in, her emotional posture changes. She no longer views herself as the one who walked away from something incomplete. She begins to question whether she walked away from something evolving, something that might have grown even stronger if she had stayed. That question lingers because it can't be answered retroactively. Your growth also changes how she perceives the past. Moments she once dismissed now carry weight. Times when you chose restraint over reaction, direction over validation, leadership over emotional indulgence. These moments gain meaning. She realizes you weren't passive. You were centered. And centered men are rare. This is where the internal conflict intensifies. On one hand, her pride resists revisiting the past. On the other, her emotions recognize a truth she can't unsee. You are no longer emotionally available in the same way, and that availability was something she took for granted. The fear now isn't rejection, it's irrelevance. Fear that she may no longer have a place in your life. What draws her back isn't nostalgia, it's curiosity mixed with humility. Curiosity about who you become. Humility in realizing she may not have fully seen you when she had the chance. Growth changes the hierarchy, and when someone moves up without you, it forces self reflection. At this stage, if she considers reaching out, it's not driven by chaos or desperation. It's measured, careful, almost cautious, because she senses that the dynamic has changed. You're no longer the man seeking clarity. You're the man who has it. And clarity is intimidating to someone who is still emotionally negotiating with the past. Her outreach, if it happens, often comes wrapped in neutrality, a casual message, a simple question, something that doesn't risk vulnerability up front. But beneath that surface is a deeper test. Are you still the same man I left, or have you moved beyond me? She's not trying to reclaim control. She's trying to understand her position. What makes this moment powerful is that you don't need it. Your growth has detached your sense of worth from her response. Whether she reaches out or not no longer defines your direction, and that non neediness is the final magnet, because desire thrives where there is freedom, not dependence. If she senses that you're open but not waiting, grounded but not guarded, respectful but not attached, the emotional pull intensifies, not because you're offering reassurance, but because you're offering reality. A version of you that exists independently of her choices. A version that continues forward regardless of her decision. This is where regret reaches its peak, not as pain, but as awareness. Awareness that she didn't lose you because of circumstance, she lost you because you chose yourself. And self chosen men don't beg for relevance, they allow others to opt in or out without resentment. The irony is that this growth benefits you whether she returns or not. If she doesn't, you still built a stronger life. If she does, the dynamic is no longer tilted toward emotional imbalance. You're not reconnecting from loss, you're reconnecting from strength. And that changes everything. By the time she truly sees you, you're no longer trying to be seen. And that's the moment where attraction, respect, and regret converge. Not because you engineered it, but because you lived your life in alignment with who you're becoming. That is the silent invitation. Not an offer, not a promise. Simply a presence that says, I move forward. You're free to follow or not.